This is the Debunking Economics podcast with Steve Keen and Phil Dobbie.
The archives.
Episode 62. Should we care about exec pay?
Hello, I'm Phil Dobbie and welcome to the Debunking Economics podcast. Today, should we care about exec pay? Is it a problem for the economy, or is our concern about how much some people are getting paid nothing more than the politics of envy? We look at the size of the problem. Does it need fixing? And if so, what do we do about it? That's today on the Debunking Economics podcast. And as always, Professor Steve Keen is with us to talk over this subject. Steve, Sir Martin Sorrell, who's the head of the advertising firm WPP, earned more than £48 million last year.
£48 million.
Yeah, that's 2,000 times the average UK wage. So is that a problem?
My decimal points go out the window when I hear somebody being paid a salary of £48 million.
No, I think he's got some bonuses and stuff like that. But this is one man. That's how much he's earning. But I mean, if he's earning that much, I mean, perhaps we should say, well, good luck to him. Does it really influence anybody else? I mean,
well, this is the perspective of mainstream economic theory, which is why they basically say inequality doesn't matter, because their argument is that we all got paid what they call their marginal product, and the argument there is that everybody is working in a competitive market, and in a competitive market, your supply equals demand. Supply is driven by in terms of demand for labour is driven by the marginal product of labour. So you're willing to pay for the next worker you hire, you're willing to pay what you think that worker is going to add in total to your total productivity and output. And therefore, if somebody gets paid £48 million, you think they're going to add in a competitive market £48 million worth of value. And so the ones you've paid lower amounts for in the past, you gain on them. And right. That's where your profit comes from.
And these companies,
$48 million.
Well, but there again,
God.
You see, one man, if he's got a lot of charisma and influence, maybe he can add £48 million per year to the value of that business.
It's all crap. I mean,
well, okay.
Only giving a technical explanation to start with and going into the emotional later. But yeah, I mean, the whole idea that we receive our marginal product actually was an elaboration of the theory of competitive markets that Marshall put together, done by J.B. Clark towards the end of the 19th century. And the argument is effectively encapsulated in the production functions that economists use these days as well, where they think, well, labour gets about 70% of GDP, and when we do our mathematics, hey, that's the number that our exponent has to be to fit the data best, and the capital gets about 30, and WAM 0.3 is about the level we need for their exponent, so it's all justified by the data. The trouble is that, in fact, what we get paid, and this applies not just to somebody being paid the outrageous amount of £48 million a year, but even to workers cleaning houses for the mere amount of £7 an hour, which I know is the going rate because that's what I pay my cleaner, and I still don't know how she damn well survives in the city on £7 an hour pay. But we're all being paid far above what our marginal product is. And this is part of what I've been doing with the energy work, because our marginal product actually relates to the amount of extra energy we can put in. Now, the amount of energy that my cleaner puts in, and she genuinely is putting the energy in because without her physical scrubbing there would be no cleaning done, is of the order of a couple of thousand calories per day, per worker. Now, a couple of thousand calories is what you can buy for about, you know, in terms of, if you went to a fast food joint, about £3 or £4. So in that sense, her daily rate, which is something hopefully maybe 10 times the hourly rate, so say £70, far exceeds what a marginal product is. Don't even try to imagine the difference between the marginal product and what the what's that guy's name again?
Martin Sorrell, Sir Martin Sorrell, we should say. I'm sure you can add an extra million because he's
Sir Lord.
Yeah,
Sir Lord Prince. If Tony had it, he'd be Prince by now. That is far exceeds his output. What we're actually living on, and this is the point of my energy arguments earlier, is we're living on energy. We are exploiting the free energy that we find in the universe. Our engineers have dramatically improved our capability to do that. And what we all get is a slice of that depending upon our relative bargaining power. Now, in the bubble world in which we live as well, where finance determines the growth of asset prices and so on. People like Sir Martin.
Yeah.
Sir Martin. Okay. Sir Martin is getting his massive share of that increase in value, monetary value, not real, of the financial assets which he's got part custody over, and slicing off that enormous amount of extra credit as a large amount of pay for him. So a huge amount of the money that, ironically, that capitalists think they're getting by paying people these wages to manage their firms is being sliced off by a comprador class that I keep on using the expression of carpetbaggers. Relates back into the post Civil War period in America, where a lot of people would start selling themselves as after the war as really, really good merchants, and you need my expertise to help you sell this grain in X direction or grab this gold or whatever else. And they made their bags out of carpets, hence the term carpetbaggers, to get themselves in there. And it was all persuasion, it was all spin, and that, frankly, is what is the basis of incomes like dear old Sir Martin is making at the moment.
But look, I mean, Sir Martin, I'm sure, isn't consuming the same amount of calories per day for the work he's doing as your cleaner. Because, I mean, God, I mean, I do feel for that woman. First of all, I feel like she's being underpaid. Surely you could push it up. So do I. You should push it up to 10 at least, surely.
That's what I'm effectively doing if it happens. But
but I mean, also cleaning up after you. I mean, God help her. But I mean, he could argue. I mean,
we're giving away trade secrets, Phil.
it's looking after. But if you're looking at one person in isolation, I mean, I'm sure Sir Martin Sorrell will argue that maybe he'd find it hard to justify 48 million a year. But I'm sure he would argue that, you know, part of his salary is ensuring the efficient running of his organization. So he will be helping that energy efficiency through the business, through the smart business decisions that he makes. So you can't look at it on an individual by individual basis, because what he says can have an influence over the operation of the whole company, which is, you know, could be many hundreds or many thousands, or, you know, other companies many tens of thousands of people.
The only people that I'm accepting being paid outrageous salaries like that are the Elon Musk of the world, the ones who actually are innovators, entrepreneurs, the ones who come up with the ideas in the very first place. The idea that a managerial class deserves that level of pay is frankly absurd. And most of the time, what I've seen with the managerial class, when they make the sort of decisions they pay themselves these enormous salaries for, they're often disastrous decisions. They're ones which maximize the short-term apparent gain on the share price, so that's what it's intended to do, often at the expense of the long-term viability of the company they're actually working in. And frequently, when you see salaries like that being paid, it's a fairly good signal that the company that's being paid that salary is likely to go bust sometime in the near future. So rather than it maximizes the short-term trajectory of shareholder value. That's what they're attempting to do. And if they get it right for a short while, they can do extremely well with the bonuses geared as they are. But this whole thing was supposed to be a way of controlling executives and making sure they behave in the interests of the firm. This is the ironic thing. Again, economic theory rears its ugly little head as the basis on which the idea that executives should be paid money based on the value of the shares, because that aligns their interests with the shareholders, and therefore they're acting as the agent for the principals with the shareholders. The principals can't actually be there. Let's make sure they do what's in our interest by giving them rewards, which are based on what they do to the value of the assets we own. And this is all built in the world in which there's no role for leverage, no role for speculation. Everything's based on rational expectation, rational ideas of the future. In fact, that's not the world in which we live in. What these guys are basically doing is creaming off some of the leverage they add to the bottom line of the company.
Right, and it's also, of course, based on the here and now. So there's no future perspective in that either. So it's a very short term measure. But look,
in fact, the future. They actually imagine this. The theory which put this all forward argues that people can actually rationally anticipate the future. And of course, as I say, if you actually believe that, there's a planet that'd like to sell you.
But look, if shareholders are happy to pay that amount, and the company pays them a dividend. If they're happy, we don't, why should we care? If we're not a shareholder in that business, does it matter that, does it significantly change my life and your life that Sir Martin Sorrell is getting paid this large sum of money? I mean, it surely only impacts us if we're a shareholder in a business where we see we're not getting the dividends we deserve because a slice of that money is being paid to the top team.
I wish that were the case, but the basic logic is that, as I've said in my model Minsky, my mathematical models of Minsky, as the level of leverage rises, the amount of money going to bankers increases, the amount going to workers falls, and the capitalists sit in the middle, thinking everything's hunky-dory until the system collapses. So what's actually going on here is that there's been a massive redistribution, effectively away from both workers and the industrial side of capitalism to the financial side of capitalism. And characters like Sir Martin are happily creaming off that increase in the proportion of income going effectively to the bankers, where the financial charges upon companies come to dominate their economic performance more so than their capacity to produce goods and services for sale.
Right. Can we break that down? How him getting a big salary is seeing more money going to the finance sector? They have to borrow more because they're paying him more? Is that part of the argument?
It's partly the fact that the increase in so-called shareholder value is driven by the money they're borrowing in the first place. Right. Which levers up the value of shares, because a major part of conventional economic theory, again, is there's no relationship between leverage and asset valuation. Now, that is manifestly false when you look at the empirical data. So the increase in leverage actually drives up the share prices effectively because you're borrowing more money to pay for them, in terms of a very simple way of looking at it. And therefore, as the share price rises, it's being driven by that leverage. Now, that only works if the leverage can continue rising indefinitely. And lo and behold, we're at the 10-year anniversary of the turning point to prove that doesn't actually happen. But we're back allowing the same behavior again because QE has restored the increase in asset prices. And largely what these guys are doing, and this actually relates to a topic we're going to talk about in a short while, what they're doing is now creaming off the increase in the valuation of share prices being driven by QE. So in effect, this is a massive transfer of money from state-generated money to the pockets of the Sir Martins of the world. They're not doing anything to generate it. It is being done. It is a systemic factor. The increase, originally the systemic factor is the increase in leverage of the economy as a whole during a typical Minsky bubble. In the aftermath of the financial crisis, the increase has now been driven by government money driving up share prices, and he's creaming off the excess.
Right. Well, look, this will add some fuel to that argument as well, but I was going to use this point to illustrate an argument that's often given about why we pay the top talent, and they used to love that word talent, why we pay them so much. Why do they get the big bucks? And that is because of competition, international competition. There's this big fight, isn't there? I mean, the next best person who might do it for half the price isn't good enough. We've got to have the top guy for this business, and therefore we have to pay him these tens of millions of pounds.
And then this is where the idea of actually publishing the executive salaries actually backfired, because you do have, I mean, there's my colleague and good friend Sandra Navidi has an excellent book I do recommend people reading about social networks in finance. Both it's good because she's actually able to converse with people in those networks, and she also understands network theory, so she puts a very good argument together on what she calls super hubs. But these people, when the salaries are exposed, it's a bit like being told that the Australian Open has a maximum prize level of $3 million.
Yeah.
Well, what
Everyone
is the
wants
American?
It.
But they know when they're the American, I said, we're going to be 3.5, and then everyone else says, we're going to be 4, et cetera, et cetera. So rather than actually driving the prices down, when these prices are being declared, it actually drove up the amount of money going to these people, because rather than display and shame, it became display and compete to get larger amounts of money out of these as executive managers. Yeah. But as I said, I simply am not willing to believe that a manager has the same impact as an entrepreneur. If Elon Musk pays himself whatever amount of money he does for coming up with the idea of Tesla, coming up with actually putting the pressure on that led to rockets being able to land on their backsides rather than crashing into the ocean. All these sorts of things are genuine innovation. Equally for Dyson over here with the whole area of Dyson technology. I can appreciate an entrepreneur getting an outrageous windfall. I cannot appreciate a manager getting an outrageous pay rate.
Right. And yet, there's a huge variation. If there is this argument about, attracting international talent, there's a huge variation as to how much CEOs get paid. So the Bloomberg Global CEO Pay Index looks at the CEO pay relative to the market capitalization of the companies that they're heading. So it comes up with an index value of 260 for the US versus 147 in the UK versus 83 in Australia versus 56 in Sweden. So by that mark, Nobody would want to be a CEO in Sweden. Everyone would want to be a CEO in America. Even worse, it's just 43 in France. So doesn't that sort of blow this international competition argument out of the window? Because everyone would just move towards the US.
Which they don't do. I mean, you have lifestyle reasons for choosing to live where you do. And again, when you look at how well companies actually function, just how successful the companies at innovation over time, the best period for innovation in general in America's history was the 50s and 60s. And back in those days, the gap between the lowest paid and the highest paid in a company was well below 100. So, and in fact, there was what you got was a team culture. And this is companies are an intriguing element of capitalism, because if you believe the mainstream theory, we should all be a bit like you and me, individual entrepreneurs, billing and paying for services, and there'd be no overall coordination. So why do companies come about in the first place? Now, a large part of that is the capability for collective action, which comes out of a culture that evolves inside a company. I saw this very well in my own father back in the days when he was a manager of the Commonwealth Bank before it became privatised. That's my new spelling, by the way, PRIVETISED, because in Australia, you'd know that maybe the listeners don't privets a weed. But before it became privatised, there was a real sense of camaraderie and collective effort amongst the members of that bank. And now, of course, we've got the outrageous salaries being paid, and the pressure is on the management to force the workers down bottom to say, would you like a loan with that whenever anybody comes in to deposit money in the bank? A sales culture has taken over, and you've actually destroyed that ethos that used to make those organizations not just effective, but also nice places to work. And I think a large part of this executive pay stuff has made them places based on envy and internal competition, when in fact that is destructive to what a corporation actually needs to be successful in the first instance, which is a sense of community.
Yeah, absolutely. But so why is it happening that way? So you mentioned at salary 100 times, it was always less than 100 times less. The top salary was always less than 100 times the bottom salary. Now in a FTSE 100 company, in fact across the board I should say, for a FTSE company, the average is 129 times the average of their workers. So the question is, are they working 100 times more effectively than the people who are in their business? What I don't get is why companies don't take someone who is almost as good, who's going to work for half the price or a quarter of that amount and might deliver, almost as good results. Why is there this race to pay the maximum? The only thing I can look at and say is, well, perhaps it's because it's chosen by the board, and the board tends to be chosen by the CEO. It's sort of there is the old boys network going on here, isn't there?
And I've seen that in universities as well. I mean, one time I was on the governing body of the elected staff rep, on the only elected staff rep for the academics on the governing body of the University of Western Sydney. I was particularly critical of the Vice Chancellor at the time, and found that I was stuck with it another 5 years because the Chancellor she appointed on his own reappointed her for another 5 years. And you get this positive feedback loop. And this is where Sandra's arguments about networks comes in is extremely important explicator of what's going on here, because once you've made it into those upper echelons, you're in a network, a social network, where everything is about maintaining. It's the norm, but maintaining the network becomes the norm. And you've got to do something outrageous, like what Strauss-Kahn did for the World Bank, to be kicked out of the network. And even so, they'll try to rescue you back in various ways. So it's not a statement of your financial contribution to the company you work for, let alone your own personal merit. It's a statement you're inside a network, and in that network, this escalation is occurring, but escalation can only occur so long as the level of leverage continues rising, or the level of money being pumped into the market that maintains share values continues rising. Before the financial crisis, it was the private monetary system generating that. After the crisis, it's QE that's generating that. Now, if either of those are taken away, these pay rates would collapse. And I think, frankly, should collapse.
So, I mean, you mentioned university vice-chancellors. The average salary for a university vice-chancellor in Britain is £277,000. God, I'm so well-researched this time around, Steve.
You are, mate. You've got it all at your fingertips.
No, it's paid, of course, out of university tuition fees. So we should be concerned about that, because if they keep on demanding more money, then obviously university tuition fees have to go up to try and pay for it. So, I mean, it's a direct causal relationship this time.
And this is exactly what's happened in Australia as well, and I've seen it there. And frankly, what you see is mediocre academics being promoted to positions of management where they're supposed to become gods as soon as they land in the Vice-Chancellor's chair. And frankly, I haven't met a Vice-Chancellor yet that impresses me as much as half the, well, we'll say 1/4 of the intellectuals I've met as an academic. Now, what is actually going on? This is the sort of thing which really pisses me off, is that you will often get somebody who's a lousy teacher, a lousy researcher, but you've got them on staff. So what do? You put them on a committee, because that means the rest of you can continue doing what you actually enjoy doing, which is either teaching or research, and you get rid of the guy who stuffs, or a woman who stuffs up both and goes onto a committee. They then become part of the university network. And the next thing you know, they come back as your boss. Now, I won't mention any names here, but I do, and the person I'm talking about is quite a nice person, but I do know of someone who, without a PhD and with a single paper to that person's name, has now become an associate professor by being promoted onto a particular bureaucratic level inside a university. And what you get is of people who don't know how to teach and don't know how to research, making decisions about teaching and research. Well, lo and behold, they don't tend to work all that well. Yeah. And then they get paid a higher amount of money to bring somebody else in who might fix the mess they've made. So you get a race to the top of mediocrity to the bottom. It's incredibly frustrating.
When we're at the level, though, that, of Sir Martin Sorrell on 48 million, there's probably just a handful of people who are on ludicrous sums like that. Yep. I mean, if surely company, if they're paying that amount to their top executives, their competitor who's not is surely going to be in a better placed position. You said yourself that these companies tend to just not survive in the long term. So perhaps these companies don't learn that over time. But if we're just talking about a handful of people getting these ludicrous salaries, I mean, do we just leave them to it? Are they really going to be that destructive to the economy? Because we're not talking about so many people.
Well, what's actually destructive is letting leverage dominate everything, letting the finance sector take over the entire economy, which we've already allowed to happen. And what we've done with QE is continue allowing that to happen afterwards, because now, rather than the private banks creating the credit that's driving up share prices, which is then capitalised into the salaries being paid to these so-called top executives, it's now the government with QE buying bonds off these companies and therefore forcing them into buying shares instead. So most of what they're doing, in fact, is buying their own shares back and driving up share prices simply by creating a shortage of their own shares. That is the basis of this incredible wealth. Now, if you get rid of it, so the leverage is really the problem. These guys are the symptom. And in some... it reminds me of one of the lines from when Harry met Sally. Oh, yeah, well, that symptom, the fact that your wife has left you with another man is just a symptom of breakdown in your relationship. And as Harry replied back, pardon anybody whose ears are delicate here, oh, yeah, well, that symptom is fucking my wife. Now, in this particular case, these symptoms are doing very nicely, thanks very much, but they are symptoms of letting finance take over the economy.
And we're going to talk about that next time. But, I mean, it does raise the question this time that anything you try to do then to try and corral these executive salaries is just going to be putting a sticking plaster on something where the fundamental wound is elsewhere.
Yeah, well, actually, I'll talk about what I would like to do in universities too, because this has occupied my time, because of working in university. How can you get vice chancellors who actually are good academics running universities in a sensible fashion? Because people like me run a mile from bureaucracy, run a mile from many clerical activities. I've been paying my own bloody airfares around the world because I can't be bothered going through all the forms the clerks want me to do to get reimbursed for the cost of flying to China or hopping on a train to Erfurt in Germany. But what would encourage somebody like me to become a vice-chancellor? It'd be something where I got paid a good, a professorial salary plus a bit. But then when I finished the job, for every year that I did the job, I got a year of research time with a research assistant and with a research budget. In that particular case, the sacrifice of being taken out of frontline teaching and frontline research would be made up by the fact that I could do as much research as I wanted and teach what I wanted to teach for the next 5 years if I was Vice-Chancellor for 5 years. And that is a reward system, which means that you get people who manage that institution who actually care about what the institution does. That's a far cry from what happens now when you pay people, in Australia's cases, it happens well over $1 million to be a Vice-Chancellor, and then end up paying people who couldn't teach a class and haven't written anything decent in their lives.
But you've got a passion, and not everybody's got that. So I mean, because I think what you're saying is it's like it's a non-monetary reward that you're looking for. It'd be very difficult to give the CEO of a company a non-monetary reward. These people are just driven by money. Yeah,
that's horrible. That's so you the entrepreneurs. That's what I say. The Musks and the Dysons. That's the pleasure they get as well as the financial reward. But the managers who do this sort of stuff would let them get away with blue murder, and they're doing very nicely out of being one of the symptoms of the financial sector.
So there's been lots of suggestions that have been made over recent years about how we can rein in these executive salaries. There was a review of public sector wages during David Cameron's prime ministership, and it was suggested that public sector top salary should be no more than 20 times the lowest paid employee. Maybe that's a start. Is it that the public sector sets an example?
Something of that sort, where you say the maximum you can pay your executive is linked to the minimum you pay your lowest paid worker.
Right. But the danger of that is, of course, then you'll just bump up the salaries of the people who clean the office, or worse, you'll just make your lowest...
That'd be dreadful.
Maybe dreadful. But then the worst thing you could do, but you might just, but a quantum of... It's the quantum difference, isn't it? So you might be paying someone $10 an hour, and you say, well, look, I'm going to give you $20 an hour so we can double the pay of our top executive, if you see what I mean.
They would put them in a different mindset. The board would no longer be thinking about the network effects that Sandra covers in super hubs. They'd be thinking more about, oh dear, we're increasing our cost base here, and that would put some restraint on them. So I do actually think something like that is quite justified social intrusion. And of course, because the money is actually being created not by these people at all, but by the leverage or government action. It's exactly the same as Henry George complained about landowners getting richer because a train line gets through and they manage to capitalise the increase in the value of the train line. These are rentiers, and you have to put a ceiling on the income that rentiers can achieve, and to do that by linking the ceiling to the floor by saying, okay, the maximum you can pay your executive is some factor of what you pay the minimum, and if you want to pay your executive £48 million, then you've got to pay to your workers £480,000. I think that might slow down the bubble.
It might, or would you just put your lowest paid salary workers onto self-employed contracts and say they don't work for you anymore?
This is the whole thing again with the 0-hour contracts, all this sort of stuff, and this is a coming battle of some scale in capitalism over time. Because, as I've argued, in the energy stuff, the only reason workers really get anything like the salaries they get right now is effectively they've got a blackmail capability. They've got to operate the machines. Now, if the machines get to the stage where the machines operate the machines, that capability to effectively blackmail and say, well, if you want the machine to be turned on, I've got to be paid a wage to do it, which far exceeds my marginal product, because it has to, then without that bargaining power, wages could go back down to the level where they are at the order of 2,000 calories a day, and we're back we're in the hunger world game. So we really have a political choice coming our way, and it has to be made at the social and systemic level. You can't leave it to corporations.
Which is perhaps why also, Theresa May was saying, well, maybe we should have workers' representatives on board, so it's not just shareholders. You have the employee representative, and she was considering mandating that, but I mean, I don't know.
That happened in Germany. I've forgotten. I know it actually still exists. What we call the Orphestrate. There were two boards. There was a corporate board and then a parallel board with representatives from both the workforce and the customers and the community of the company. And I think that's actually one reason why German companies have generally been more successful than Europe, certainly than UK ones. That idea that you have your obligations owed to more than just the shareholders, and so in that sense. Yeah, institutionalize it in that way, so there's more decision makings involved, is a good thing. And what I found with, particularly with the universities, where back when I was a university student, there were plenty of staff representatives on the major bodies of the university, and that certainly constrained this sort of behaviour. As time goes on, it's more about, we need good managers there. Academics aren't good managers, therefore we don't have any representatives, and you can't make any votes, and you always get out and voted anyway by the people the managers happen to have appointed themselves to their positions on the boards. We're getting screwed. And it's about time we realised we were getting screwed, and salaries like that deserve to get screwed instead.
Well, of course, one common business structure, which is much more prevalent in the UK and Europe than it is in Australia, is the idea of a cooperative. So we look at the cooperative group, which is a big cooperative in Australia. Their top executive, Richard Pennycook, was earning £3.6 million. The members, rather than the shareholders, because of course in a cooperative, if you work there, basically you're a member of the cooperative. They objected to £3.6 million. They thought that was too much, so he took a 60% pay cut. Willingly, it seems. So, that sort of points to the idea, well, okay, if you're not a cooperative, but we need to look after the interests of people who are working within the company as well as the interests of shareholders, then perhaps we would see less of this extravagant salary payouts.
Yeah, I think so. So we've got to see that really the decision about the amount of money to pay is not based on your productivity. It's based on your network, the position you have in a social network, and the bargaining power that gives you. And we've given far too much bargaining power to the super hubs.
But if we work on the basis that it's going to be very hard to break down those networks, because as you say, it is a social network that we are not connected to, but when you are part of it, they do everything to keep you in the club. It seems you can do all sorts and still be acceptable. You can be responsible for sort of abusing your staff, being implicated in some sort of sexual controversies with your staff, as we've seen in Australia, and you just bounce back into another job after leaving a prominent retailer. You can suddenly find another job shortly afterwards. So we see that sort of stuff happening all the time. So and similarly, if we start to impose structures on how much is the top level of pay and linking it to the bottom, as you say, as I suggested, there's ways around that. I mean, is the other approach, and I know you don't like this, but it was one that Franklin Roosevelt proposed during the Second World War. There should be a maximum income. He said at the time £25,000. It didn't happen. Anything over £25,000 you taxed at 100%, and the UK wasn't far off that. From the war through to the 70s, basically the top rate of tax was 90%. It gets over the problem. You can't be paid a vast amount of money because you're just going to lose it in tax anyway.
Yeah, I think I'm sympathetic to that, generally speaking, but I also want to leave that capacity for entrepreneurs to see the potential for outrageous gain. One argument I'm persuaded by Bill Janeway's argument that entrepreneurs get into the game of taking the risks they do, partly because of the vision of outrageous gain. Now, I know, for example, Elon Musk, and he said this publicly, his reason for accumulating money is to finance the development of a colony on Mars. So that's a very socially oriented entrepreneur. But I want to distinguish actually that's the entrepreneurs still make those outrageous gains and not have them taxed away. But certainly managers, I would have no problem with 100% tax or some sort of ceiling saying this is just as much as we're going to accept in this country. If you want to live in the UK, this is the maximum salary you can take out of a company.
All right, very good. Otherwise, you think it is this linking top pay to bottom pay without the top pay being made public knowledge, because that could drive wages up. So it's difficult to police.
Once you have the link to the bottom, then I think it actually becomes, you see a substantial drop in the level of those top salaries. But the main thing is take the fuel away. And what actually fuels this stuff is, I said, either leverage on one hand or what the central banks are doing right now through QE, which is pumping up asset prices. In that case, these guys are just siphoning it off. If you actually stop the pressure going in to drive up the share prices, then they can't siphon off anywhere near as much.
All right, cool. And we're going to talk about QE next time. So very good. Thank you, Steve. We'll talk about that then. Thanks for coming on.
Okay, bye.
And that is an interesting point to finish on, isn't it? That these execs are getting performance bonuses based on the increase in share prices. And the biggest influence on those share prices going up has been the bubble created by quantitative easing from central banks. Nothing to do with the performance of the execs at the top of the company. And look, we'll explore that more next time. If you've enjoyed our discussion and you're not a subscriber, then subscribe. And you can hear all of these either at debunkingeconomics.com or by supporting Professor Steve Keen on Patreon. Pay $10 or more per month, and you'll get access to one or two of these podcasts each week, plus the whole back catalogue covering every aspect of economics. I'm Phil Dobbie. Till next time, thanks for listening.